Police entered a quiet house in Surrey. A 10-year-old girl was gone. Her parents had fled the country. It wasn't the first time a home had turned violent, and it won't be the last. Across the world, from Singapore to Pakistan, from Britain to the United States, parents who were meant to protect became the ones their children feared. These aren't stories from the distant past. They happened in the last few years, inside homes that looked just like ours. This is not horror fiction. It's fact. Real stories of parental aggression, abuse, and control, told so they're never forgotten. The most aggressive parents in modern times, real stories.
Woking, Surrey, 2023. 10 years old. Sara Sharif. On August 10th, police found her body inside a quiet house at the end of a suburban street. Her father, stepmother, and uncle had already left the country. Inside that home, investigators counted more than 70 injuries. Weeks of bruises, cuts that had begun to heal, and others that never would. To neighbors, the family seemed ordinary. Curtains closed, no noise, no sign of what was happening inside. Behind those walls, discipline had become punishment. Punishment had become torture. She was homeschooled, hidden from friends, hidden from questions. When the adults fled, they left a single note, a number to call, and nothing more. Sara's death forced Britain to confront a familiar horror, that some forms of violence grow quietly under the name of family. In the courtroom months later, her voice was gone, but every photo of her bruises spoke instead. One investigator said it wasn't rage, it was routine. That's what made it unforgivable. Because cruelty repeated becomes normal, and once it feels normal, it hides forever. Singapore, 2024. 5 years old. Her name was Ayeesha. When she was brought to the hospital, she weighed less than a 2-year-old. Doctors said she had no muscle left. Her body had been eating itself to stay alive. At home, food was punishment. Her parents starved her for mistakes a child couldn't understand. They said they were teaching discipline. They said it was for her own good. For months, neighbors heard her cry. No one called. When she stopped making noise, everyone assumed she'd finally learned to behave. In the trial that followed, prosecutors showed the photos, the bruises, the bruise timeline, and the notebook her mother kept, recording each time she was denied a meal. The defense called it stress. The court called it murder. Singapore rewrote its child protection laws because of her. The reforms were named in her memory. But for the people who saw her last, the question still hangs in the air. How does a parent watch their child fade and call it care? Some deaths are loud. This one was silent, a punishment that lasted until the body couldn't obey anymore. Jhelum, Pakistan, October 2025. 2 children, both under 10. That night, their parents argued, the same argument they'd have for weeks, about money, about failure, about who should carry the blame. In a house with bare walls and no light, anger filled the silence that poverty had left behind. Then in a moment no one can fully explain, both parents turned that anger on their children. By morning, the neighbors heard nothing. The door was still locked from the inside. When police entered, they found what they later called a scene of despair, not hatred. The couple didn't run. They sat on the floor, waiting. They said they couldn't afford to live, and they couldn't afford to let their children suffer with them. The words shocked the country, not just for the crime, but for the calm that followed it. Investigators described the parents as quiet. No record of violence, no history of rage. Just pressure, the kind that builds until it breaks everything soft first. In court, one officer said, they didn't look like killers. They looked tired. Tiredness can turn into cruelty. Desperation can turn into death. And sometimes the difference between love and destruction is just one night too long without hope. Delaware, United States, February 2024. Mary and Charles Vinson, parents of 6. On the outside, they looked like any small-town family. A 2-story home, a front yard, polite smiles for neighbors. Inside, it was a different world. Over years, they turned discipline into torture. The children were beaten, starved, locked away in rooms for days. Some were forced to stand through the night, too scared to fall asleep. One child later told investigators, "We stopped crying because it made things worse." In 2024, a teacher noticed bruises and called the police. The raid revealed what had been hidden behind those painted walls. Rooms stripped bare, chains, belts, and the smell of fear. 6 children rescued, 2 hospitalized. The parents sentenced to over 150 years in prison, one of the longest sentences ever given for child abuse in U.S. history. Prosecutors said it wasn't one act, but thousands, small daily acts of cruelty that became normal. In court, the oldest child spoke. "I still flinch when someone raises their hand, even if it's just to wave." That line stayed with everyone in the room, because that's what aggression does. It doesn't always end with death. Sometimes it just keeps living, inside the ones who survived. Houston, Texas, September 2024. 2 months old. His name was Zayn Alston. When paramedics arrived, he wasn't breathing. The report described skull fractures, bleeding behind the eyes, and marks that told a longer story than his short life ever could. His parents said he'd fallen. The doctors said otherwise. The injuries were layered, old and new, proof that the pain hadn't begun that night. For weeks, neighbors had heard crying. No one stepped in. When the truth surfaced, both parents were charged with murder. Prosecutors called it one of the most brutal cases of infant abuse in the state's history. Reporters stood outside the courthouse, cameras waiting, while a photo of a smiling baby looped on the screen. A life measured in weeks and in wounds. The detectives who worked the case still talk about it, not the crime itself, but the question it left behind. How does someone look at a child that small and see anything worth hurting? Some stories are long. His lasted only 60 days. But it was enough to remind a nation that violence at home doesn't start with monsters. It starts with moments of anger, left unchallenged, until they turn into something no one can undo. Around the world, these stories are more than headlines. They're warnings. Proof of what happens when love turns into control and control turns into violence. From the murder of Sara Sharif in the UK, to the Ayeesha child abuse case in Singapore, to the Jhelum tragedy in Pakistan, the Vinson abuse case in the United States, and the infant Zayn Alston's death in Houston, each one shows a different face of modern parental aggression. They remind us that child abuse doesn't belong to one country, one culture, or one time. It happens quietly, behind closed doors, inside ordinary homes, where discipline becomes domination and love becomes control. These are true crime stories, but also real human tragedies, carried out not by strangers, but by the people children trusted most. Every investigation, every report, every photo shown in court, they're not just evidence. They're the echoes of fear and the voices of children who couldn't speak for themselves. In history, we remember wars and disasters, but the worst violence often begins quietly, in the place meant to be safest. If even one story makes someone stop, listen, or reach out before anger becomes harm, then it wasn't told in vain. These are the most aggressive parents in modern times, real stories. Modern true crime. Real victims. Real lessons. Because every act of cruelty has a beginning, and every story told may stop the next one from starting.